The US Supreme Court just killed Trump's emergency tariff. Within hours, he announced a new 10% global tariff and hinted it could rise to 15%. India has already delayed the trade talks. Markets are watching. So, did the court really stop him? Or did this start a new power struggle? Can a president lose 6 is to 3 and still raise tariffs? The US Supreme Court just blocked Donald Trump's global emergency tariffs, and that decision could affect the price on everyday goods from electronics to clothing at stores like Walmart. It could affect the factory jobs in manufacturing heavy states like Ohio and Michigan. And it could affect America's ability to pressure China in trade negotiations. Here's what happened. In a case called Learning Resource INE versus Trump, the Supreme Court ruled 6 is to 3 against the administration. The court said the emergency law Trump used, called IEEPA, does not authorize tariffs. Let's understand what it is. IEEPA stands for International Emergency Economic Power Acts. It's a 1977 law that lets the president freeze foreign assets, block financial transactions, and respond to national security threats. But the court said it doesn't clearly allow a president to impose broad tariffs. So, the tariffs that rely on that emergency law were effectively struck down. But within hours, Trump announced a new 10% global tariff and signaled it could rise to 15%, the maximum allowed under a different trade law. So, what just happened? Did the Supreme Court actually stop him? Or is this a constitutional chess? To understand what just happened, we need to look at the constitutional design behind it. The Constitution gives Congress, not the President, the power to create tariffs. That's in Article 1, Section 8. Tariffs are basically taxes on imports, and the founders wanted taxation decisions made by the lawmakers, people closest to the voters. So, originally, only Congress could set tariffs. But here's the problem. Trade disputes doesn't move at the congressional speed. They move fast. A currency crisis, a trade war, a national security threat. These things can happen in weeks, not months. So, over time, Congress passed law that allows president to act quickly in specific situations. For example, Section 232 allows tariffs for national security reasons. Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974 allows temporary tariffs up to 15% for up to 150 days. And IEEPA, passed in 1977, allows the president to freeze assets and blocks financial transactions during emergency. Notice something? Section 232 clearly mentions national security. Section 122 clearly mentions temporary tariffs. But IEEPA talks about freezing assets and blocking transactions. It never clearly says tariffs. And that's the key. When the Congress delegates power, it has to be clear about what it's delegating. The Supreme Court has said Congress cannot just say, President, do whatever you want. It has drawn boundaries. In this case, the court said IEEPA does not clearly authorize tariffs. So, the tariffs imposed under that emergency law were struck down. But Trump didn't ignore the ruling. He switched to a different law, Section 122. That law explicitly allows temporary tariff up to 15% for 150 days. So this isn't a open defiance. It's using a different legal tool that Congress already approved. That's what we mean by legal maneuvering inside the rules. And after 150 days, either Congress steps in or the authority expires. And that raises a big question. If Congress keeps passing these flexible trade laws, has it slowly shifted much tariff power to the president? Investors immediately started reassessing the US trade policy. Markets didn't crash, but they reacted cautiously. The Dow moved modestly, and sectors that are sensitive to the global trade, like retail, manufacturing, logistics, saw a noticeable swing. That's because tariffs are not abstract policy tools, they are taxes on imports. And when import taxes change, corporate cost structure changes. Take Walmart, for example. Large retailers depend heavily on the global supply chains. Electronics assembled in Asia, apparels from the Vietnam, household goods from China. If tariff moves from 10% to potentially 15%, those added costs have to go somewhere. Companies either absorb the hits to profit or pass a part of it to the consumer. Now, look at it from the Midwest manufacturing perspective. Some domestic producers actually benefit from the higher tariffs because foreign competitors become more expensive. But other manufacturers rely on the imported components, steel inputs, machinery parts, electronics. For them, tariffs raise production costs. So, the economic impact isn't simple. It depends on where you sit in the supply chain. That's why market reacts carefully rather than dramatically. Investors don't just care about tariff levels. They care about stability and predictability. If the policy changes quickly from IEEPA to Section 122, businesses have to constantly recalculate. And that recalculation itself creates uncertainty. Internationally, the reaction was similar. India paused a planned trade delegation to Washington to reassess the situation. Officials want clarity before negotiating. Is the 10% tariff temporary? Will it increase to 15%? Will Congress step in after 150 days? Trade negotiations depend on knowing the rules of the game. And when the rules appear to shift quickly, countries slow down the talks until they understand the new framework. Meanwhile, global supply chains don't wait for political certainty. Importers adjust the orders. Contractors get renegotiated. Shipping routes shift. And that's the key economic takeaway. Uncertainty doesn't just create headlines, it creates real cost. This isn't the first time the president has tested the limits of the executive powers. In 1974, during the Watergate scandal, the Supreme Court ruled in United States versus Nixon that President Nixon had to turn over the Oval Office tapes. Nixon had argued that the executive privilege the president needs for the confidential communications allowed him to refuse. The court anonymously disagreed. It said executive privilege is real, but it's not absolute. That case became a refining moment in the constitutional history. It reinforced a core idea: the president is powerful, but the president is not above the law. Now, fast forward to today, the fight over the tariff isn't about the secret tapes, it's about the economic authority. But the constitutional tension is similar. How far can a president go when Congress has granted both powers? And when does the court step in and say, that's too far? But here's the twist: trade powers in America isn't simple. For decades, Congress hasn't kept tariffs entirely to itself. It has passed law giving the presidents specific limited tools. As discussed before, Section 232 for national security threats, Section 301 for unfair trade practices, Section 122 for temporary economic emergencies. So presidents don't just invent tariff powers, they use the authority Congress already wrote into the law. That's why this ruling is narrower than it sounds. In Learning Resource versus Trump, the court didn't say the president can't impose tariffs. It said you can't use this emergency law IEEPA to do it. One door closed, but the hallway is still open. And that's why Trump could pivot within hours. This isn't a total defeat, it's a recalibration of which legal tools are allowed. Over decades, Congress handled presidents with powerful trade tools. Now we are seeing what happens when those tools are pushed to limits. And in 2026, that debate isn't theoretical anymore. It's real. Section 122 tariffs last 150 days. After that, Congress must act or the administration must pivot again. More lawsuits could follow. Some analysts are watching whether the Section 232 or 301 could be used next. The court drew one line. The administration found another path. And the bigger fight over who truly controls America's trade power isn't over yet. The Supreme Court said emergency power is not unlimited. Trump said trade pressure must continue. The Constitution says tariffs belong to Congress. But Congress has handed the pieces of that power away. So, the real question isn't just can Trump raise tariffs after losing 6 to 3? It's this: who really controls America's economic power?